Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. We have the whole crew with us this week, Kipp Adams and Benjamin Wolk, getting ready for another highly anticipated game in Sanford Stadium, getting ready for Georgia's Week 11 game against Ole Miss. Before we get into the matchup with the Rebels, we are going to circle back, look at Georgia's very big, very competitive 30-21 win over Missouri last Saturday. Fellas, let's just go ahead and jump right into that. Very competitive four-quarter game between Georgia and Missouri. Georgia finds a way to win. Two very big fourth-quarter interceptions, none bigger than that from Nazir Stackhouse, and Georgia finds a way to win that game. Ben, I will start with you. You were there with me in the press box in Sanford. What stands out to you a few days removed from that win for Georgia, how they were able to get it done against a really good Missouri team, and how they remained undefeated?
I think Georgia showed what it has a few different times this season. I mean, not to lean on what Kirby said about their ability to take a punch and give a punch, but I think that's kind of what we saw on Saturday again against Missouri. I mean, there were moments where, and I think Kirby said this after the game too, that they got whooped at times throughout the game. And I think that Missouri, I came away maybe more impressed by Missouri than I was going into the game, because I think they did some really good things in the stretch run game. I think that they were really physical up front, which those Missouri defenses year in and year out are just proving to be one of the more physical, aggressive defenses that Georgia plays. And I think that, Georgia had some struggles at times throughout that game, but when it came down to it, they made the plays that they needed to make. When they fell behind, they went down the field and scored touchdowns. Late in the game, they probably would have liked to put a couple of those field goal possessions. They probably would have liked to punch those in just to spread the point differential a little bit more, make it a little bit less stress-free. But really, the only possession that I look at in that game, and I say this is a little bit cause for concern maybe, was when Georgia went up 24-13. And it sort of felt like, all right, this is one of those situations that Georgia just puts these games away. And ultimately they did put it away, but it just felt like Missouri kind of had their way on that offensive possession. They punched in a long third down conversion as well. And it was just one of those possessions that I think that Georgia faithful probably would sit there and say, we'd prefer to not have that, happen. That said, they responded very well to that, had two scoring drives immediately after that. But again, I think that it was a good win and another really, really big time matchup coming up as well. So we really find ourselves right in the middle of that, vaunted 4-game stretch that we've been talking about for a long time.
Kipp, you did the post-game podcast looking at this win over Missouri. What still stands out to you a few days later, the way that Georgia was able to win this game?
Just how Georgia handles adversity. Like Ben said, I mean, just the fact that, Missouri took that 7-3 lead. Georgia had just comes back with a touchdown. They answered the call again when Missouri went up 13-10. Georgia scored 2 times in a row. We're kind of seeing just similar storylines over and over where Georgia in the third quarter looks like, the Georgia of the last 2 seasons now. I think we're up to where they outscored their opponents 100-16 now in the third quarter. So it still becomes bottling up that third quarter and playing 4 quarters of Georgia football. But I think when you get to this part of the season, it's interesting because this is supposed to be now you are who you are. So why is Georgia able to, just come out and dominate so much in the third quarter? I guess it goes to the, those halftime adjustments. And that's really where this coaching staff's kind of really, hit their stride under Kirby Smart, is that, regardless of what happens when the opponents go on script, once they start making adjustments, I think Georgia is able to do that probably better than any other coaching staff in the country. And, they may not have anyone out there, stealing signs to help them do that. I just think it goes back to their ability to immediately look on film, see what's working and go with it. And that really goes back to, they put a lot on Carson Beck's plate, and he's able to, distribute the ball to so many different wide receivers. And I think that's, throughout the course of the season, he's kind of still gone under the radar because, you come into this game against Ole Miss and they're known as, this team that just has an outstanding offense. Lane Kiffin gets a lot of credit, but Carson Beck's the number 2 passer in the conference. And, they're throwing the ball more than they ever have before. He's doing it again without Brock Bowers. So I just think that there are a lot of interesting storylines. And honestly, we have talked about this one since the game ended, but just the fact that, they put Kamari Lassiter there in the slot on Luther Burden. I know he's a little banged up, but just the job that, he did, them making that change, acknowledging, okay, he's beating us there. We're going to have to, put a stop to that. And I think he was quiet the rest of the game. I think, he caught a 2-point conversion, but at the end of the day, he was thrown to 7 times, only caught 3 of them. And it was like 50, 55 yards. That's a good day for Georgia's secondary. Outstanding day for Kamari Lassiter, a big, NFL draft stock day for him. And I just think it's interesting. You put Julian Humphrey in there. He played more snaps, played as many snaps as Dalen Everett, if not more. That was a grow up game for the secondary. And we kind of talked about that, how, they would be tested a lot. I really thought that they, adjusted and played really well after the first couple of possessions.
Yeah, to your point with Luther Burden, I think his touchdown was like 39 yards. And then after that, he had like 14. And you did point out the 2-point conversion. I think a lot of credit due to the secondary for how they adjusted with Kamari moving down to star, with Tyke, probably not playing quite as much being in the dime. But to me, guys, one of the biggest plays, I think, of the game came from Tyke in that third quarter. Missouri gets the ball and is driving down the field. And 3rd and 7, Tyke blitzes and sacks Brady Cook. They have to settle for a field goal. I do think that game is a whole lot different if Missouri scores that touchdown. And it's sort of like, okay, we're maybe not in a shootout sort of situation, but like, okay, there's going to be a lot of points scored. Really big play from Tyke, and we talked to him on Monday. And very team first guy, said, that it's all about the team before me, understanding why the move was made with Kamari moving over there. And he gave Kamari a ton of credit for what he was able to do. Some of the other notes or things that stood out to me from that game. And on Tuesday, I wrote my rewatch story. So if you're listening to this, I would encourage you to go read it, because there's a lot of notes in there. It seemed like Georgia just could not get the ball moving on 1st and 2nd down. They faced so many long 3rd downs. They averaged like a 3rd and 7. And, you're putting yourself in very bad situations. You don't give yourself 3rd manageable. And when you're really having to put yourself in situations where the defense knows you're going to throw here, Georgia had 5 3rd downs where they needed at least 9 yards. And, they're really lucky that did not come back to bite them. I think that was a real issue and caused some mistakes and miscues on the offense. The offensive line gives up 3 sacks after they'd only given up 6 coming into this game. I do think a lot of the credit there is due to Missouri. But yeah, I mean, there were situations that I think they would really want to clean up out of this game. But again, you win the game, you smile, you celebrate it for a few hours, and you go right back to work. So turning the page, looking at this Missouri game, but looking at it from a recruiting standpoint, Ben, a lot of notable recruits were on hand for this one. What can you tell us just about some of the stories coming out of the visit weekend, and any interesting nuggets coming out of what we saw on Saturday?
Well, Kipp, I'd definitely love to hear sort of your insights on that one as well. But my take on it is there was a lot of good 2025 and 2026 look aheads there. I mean, just listing off a couple of names: Juan Gaston, Zayden Walker, Jackson Cantwell, Jabori Antoine, a defensive back from Louisiana. Always good to get out of state guys on campus for games because it shows a significant level of interest. But really, to me, the big storyline from the weekend was Georgia's wide receiver recruiting. They had Cam Michael from Statesboro, Georgia, on a visit on an unofficial. This was his first game visit that he'd been on this year, and he's been to a lot of other places. I think that Georgia probably felt they were a little bit behind coming into the weekend, and I think that a lot of that is related to some of the things that we've talked about throughout his recruitment. Georgia was the last one to give him a shot at wide receiver, really. They've been recruiting him as a defensive back this whole time. That tune has changed over the last month plus or so, and he definitely spent a lot of time with wide receivers coach Brian McClendon this weekend during pregame warmups. He was standing right next to the wide receivers watching everything that they were going through. So it's clear that he is a Georgia wide receiver target at this point. He was not the only Georgia wide receiver target that was on campus. They had an official visitor, North Carolina State commit Terrell Anderson. He came on this visit. That's his second time that he's been on a visit in the last month or so. He was at the Kentucky game on an unofficial visit as well. Nothing has changed in regards to Terrell Anderson's recruitment yet, but certainly something to continue to watch. I think that there's probably a little bit of positional interplay going on here with Cam Michael, with Terrell Anderson, obviously with Nitro Tuggle still getting recruited by other places as well. And then the looming transfer portal coming as well. And Georgia saw a lot of success taking 2 guys out of the portal last cycle as well. So I think the wide receiver position probably becomes the most interesting position group to follow as we approach signing day, though I'm sure the defensive line might have something to say about that too. But those would probably be my main takeaways from the Georgia-Missouri game when it comes to recruiting. Obviously a big one coming up with Ole Miss and a night game as well.
Kipp, any additional thoughts just on the folks who visited for that Missouri game?
Yeah, again, Cam Michael, Statesboro athlete. You know, I go back to the fact that Georgia's recruited this guy for several years now. Terrell Anderson's kind of popped onto the scene, showed a lot of interest in Georgia. You know, he made a commitment to NC State in August. You know, his stock has been up since then. He's obviously a guy that Georgia likes a lot. That, you know, you bring someone in on, you know, a visit, you bring him in for multiple visits, official visit. There's interest there. Where his timeline is and where, you know, Georgia's timeline is, that remains to be seen. I know that, you know, there's mutual interest. They like each other. But at the end of the day, Georgia's got 27 commitments already. And I've kind of said there's maybe room for 2 or 3 more guys in this class because Georgia's going to save spots for the transfer portal. It's not something that Georgia uses heavily, but they are going to look for some impact guys. And I'll just say it, regardless of what happens with this class, they're going to look for an impact wide receiver in the transfer portal. And I mean, you can look at Florida State, what they've been able to do with a guy like Keon Coleman, what Georgia's doing, you know, with the guys they have with Dominic Lovett and Ra Thomas, they are going to look for another guy in the portal. So that's a spot right there. Probably a D lineman or 2, you know, maybe an interior guy, maybe an edge guy, which just so happens to also be kind of where they're still recruiting in this class. So I think you just got to look at the board. They're having to make decisions on every single spot and whether they're going to take a high school player or a guy from the transfer portal to make an impact next year. The only thing I know for certain right now at wide receiver is that, you know, Cam Michael has a spot in Athens, regardless of what position he wants to play. They've already told him that. They've made that choice. That's where he is on the board, and they are recruiting him like that. And he's ready to make a decision in 2 weeks, I believe, Thanksgiving. And he's got visits coming up again to Tennessee and Colorado. Those are the biggest competitors for Georgia. Right now, Georgia has to feel good about where they stand because he's always had high interest in Georgia. We thought at one point he might be a guy that, you know, would decide to jump on board over the summer. Georgia would have been that school back then, but obviously his desire to play wide receiver, you know, kind of changed that thing a little bit. Georgia's come in and said, hey, you know, we'll give you an opportunity to play wide receiver. It doesn't matter because he's that kind of athlete. And I think right now Georgia's got some momentum, but again, they got to fight off a couple of programs that have done pretty well recruiting the wide receiver position as of late. So we'll see what happens in a couple of weeks.
That's a good reminder from Kipp when we get to Turkey Day for everyone listening. You know, you'll be watching the football games, have your phone pulled up to Dogs 24/7. We'll have the latest on Cam Michael and what he decides to do. We will take a quick break, come back, and start talking a little bit about Georgia Ole Miss and what we might see in Sanford Stadium on Saturday night. Welcome back, everybody. Well, let's turn the page to Georgia Ole Miss, a very highly anticipated game between number 2 Georgia and number 10 Ole Miss. 7 p.m. Eastern Time kickoff, ESPN, Sanford Stadium. Going to be a very exciting atmosphere and a very fun game. We had a chance to talk to Kirby Smart and a few players on Monday getting ready for this game. Some really interesting nuggets from Coach Smart. Took time to really credit Lane Kiffin the job he's done there. Spoke really highly of Jackson Dart. I thought it was interesting to hear Kirby say that Lane's quarterbacks sort of take on his mentality and the way they play, and I think you've seen that. I think Jackson Dart has done a very good job this season. I think the guy that really interests me the most is Quinshon Judkins, and I think that's going to be one of the big challenges that Georgia is going to face, trying to slow him down. He has hit over 100 yards in his last 3 games, really seems to be hitting his stride coming down through November in some of the Rebels' final games. I'll start with you. Sort of about this matchup. What intrigues you about what Georgia's going to see from this Ole Miss team and the fight they're getting ready for on Saturday night?
Yeah, I think Ole Miss, kind of like Missouri, is going to test Georgia's defense. Now, last week it was really about the secondary, and I think still this offense has a chance to put some pressure on the secondary, where Missouri was similar to Georgia, kind of in its precision passing. Ole Miss kind of just throws those higher percentage throws out the window in exchange for like just a vertical passing game. And anyone who was kind of watching last week in that, the game, that the performance that Trey Harris put on, it was incredible, the catches that he was making. And so that right there, that's the guy to kind of keep an eye on. Just a guy that's but 6'2", 210 pounds, and just making outstanding plays as a Louisiana Tech transfer for the Rebels. I think he's a guy that really, his stock is up. He had a performance for the ages last week. So obviously that's going to be a guy that Georgia's going to have to key in on. But at the same time, those longer routes and that offensive line for Ole Miss, that gives Georgia a chance to kind of get home before its secondary is stressed. So I think this week, the pressure's on Georgia's defensive line. It's front and early downs and on third down. Because like you said, Quinshon Judkins, he's had a lot of success this season, and they run the ball percentage-wise as much as like Auburn does. It's a very, very high percentage of runs for them, a lot more than what you would expect when you start thinking about this Ole Miss offense. And so with that in mind, I think Lane Kiffin's not going to be afraid to give his back the ball 20, 30 times in a game if he gets hot. So I think this Georgia defensive line is going to have to really play their tails off. And again, I think that's going to be the key. You do not want to force your secondary to be out there, for a long time. Especially if Georgia has to go zone, if they have to start blitzing, just like with Missouri, you saw that there are plays to be made by Jackson Dart, and Georgia's going to have to pick its poison on what they're willing to give up. And that's always what Kirby Smart talks about. What cost? Is the cost too high to send an extra blitzer? And so at the end of the day, I mean, this is Michael Williams, Tiernan Ingram Dawkins, even Nazir Stockhouse. These guys have to get home so that Georgia doesn't have to send extra guys. And we've said it before, like, play Jalen Walker more. This is one of those games where, again, start using him as much as you can in the pressure packages so that you get them behind the sticks. And on the flip side, the Rebels probably, they might do a better job than Missouri as far as getting pressure. And they often do it without like exotic blitz packages as well. And so we saw early in the game against Missouri, they were able to get home and sack Carson Beck a couple of times. That you can't have that happen against a team like this. And so Georgia's offensive line, they're going to have to play a little bit better than they played in the first half and not get, again, behind schedule against this Ole Miss defense.
Ben, how about you? What intrigued you the most going into Saturday night?
Well, I think it's natural, especially the way that Missouri was able to run the ball last week, especially on the perimeter a little bit, that the Quinshon Judkins matchup is the one that everybody is going to be watching closest. I do tend to think that this Georgia defensive staff does a really good job of stopping whatever the other team does best or focusing on whatever the other team does best. And so I think part of what we saw last week, and we saw this with the position adjustment with bringing Kamari Lassiter inside, I think there was a lot of focus last week on those 3 wide receivers that Missouri has. Not that they were shortchanging or taking for granted what Missouri was going to be able to do running the ball, but I think that they felt that if, Luther Burden only caught 50, had 50 yards receiving, if all of their receivers were held under 100 yards, if Brady Cook was only throwing for 200, I think that they were going to feel pretty good about the result of that game. Now, I think Missouri ran the ball more effectively than Georgia would have liked. I think that will be a point of emphasis this week. But I think when you look at this this Ole Miss team, obviously what Quinshon Judkins does is probably the thing that scares you the most. And so I think that will be a major focus this week. So I think that Georgia will probably stand up pretty well against the run. That said, to Kipp's point, I think a lot of this comes down to the defensive line creating pressure in some of those high leverage situations. I mean, Ole Miss is one of the only teams in college football that's better on first and second down offensively than Georgia is. And I know that was a bit of that didn't happen last week for Georgia offensively, but throughout the course of the season, Georgia's been really, really good on first and second down. I think Ole Miss is top 10 in the country on EPA on early downs. And so that means there's going to be a lot of third and shorts. That means that Georgia's going to have a lot of situations where they've got 3rd and 2s, 3rd and 3s, 3rd and 4s. Who is Georgia putting out there on the field? Obviously, it doesn't seem to me that Jamon Dumas-Johnson will probably be out there. So I think those are going to be the moments that decide this game are who wins those third down matchups. Georgia's been really good offensively and defensively on third down this season. And so I think that if they stand up, against Ole Miss on third down, I think Georgia will win this game. And that's probably a pretty boring answer because turnovers and third downs probably decide a lot of football games, but that's just the way that I see this close one going.
You'll also have to beat them on 4th down. I mean, this is a team that has tried to go for it on 4th down 24 times this season. I think that's what they've got the 3rd or 4th most conversions in college football. So that's another aspect with Lane that Georgia's going to have to be prepared that if they get in Georgia territory that they're going to go for it on 4th down.
It's a very good point, Kipp. But, Ben, you took basically what I was going to say. I mean, the fact that third down is going to matter a whole lot in this game. And, I wanted to hit on, in case anyone had missed it with Jamon, sounds like a fractured arm. Kirby was being very coy about it on Monday. He was asked, so what specifically is it? And he's like, I'm just basically sticking with what I said Saturday night, although he did say a bone in the leg.
Yeah, I actually I'm going to take some personal accountability for that one because I unnecessarily chirped Kirby for saying tibia. We probably should have just let it be. You make comments in post-game press conference. He's not a doctor. And then I think on Monday, he was like, well, I don't want to answer these questions. We had these jerk-offs calling me or saying that I don't know anything about bones a couple days ago. So that's
it happens to the best of us. Just know that. It happens to the best of us. But I bring that up to say, now the onus is on Smile Munden, and I would say C.J. Allen, and I think you will see some Raylan Wilson too, but Quinshon Judkins is a very good back, and I don't know if you guys feel the same. Feel free, either one of y'all, to chirp in. I thought Jamon had really come on in the last few games. He was playing really well when he got hurt.
It feels to me like he heard some of the chirps just because there were some early season chirps. And I think that he was like, all right, guys, what are we doing here? I've been a sound starter on this team for a while now. Give me the respect that I deserve. And I think that he's been playing well. So bummer to see him get injured. And obviously, as we've talked about Quinshon Judkins, not that it's a direct inside linebacker to running back matchup, but definitely you don't want Jamon Dumas-Johnson not playing for a game when you've got one of the best running backs in college football coming the other direction.
Yeah, those are the games on the schedule where, it also just kind of highlighted his skill set. He had, playing Kentucky, Florida, Missouri. These were opportunities where they needed guys out there to win those early downs. And then that's the other aspect. He's the one calling the defense. And so that's a huge responsibility that now I guess is probably going to go to Smile Munden. And, whether they're asking C.J. Allen, what they're asking, Raylan Wilson to do. This week in practice on what kind of looks, what packages they're they're going to show Ole Miss, and how many snaps are these guys going to play? Are you going to get 40 snaps on defense from CJ Allen now? Are you going to increase Jalen Walker? Just he's a rush guy, but he's still going to put a different package out there, or maybe you just have a single inside backer. There's just a lot of different ways for them to kind of attack this, but replacing Jamon Dumas-Johnson now, I think he's going to gain a lot more fan appreciation these next couple of games, just because Georgia's going to have to find different ways to get stops. And I think just his ability, I mean, he was leading the team in tackles for loss, sacks. I mean, he was that guy that was making plays in the backfield as well. So I just think overall, he may not have been the most athletic inside linebacker Georgia's ever had. I feel pretty safe in saying that. But he was definitely a guy that was always around the football and took great angles toward the ball carrier. So underappreciated there. Hopefully we get to see him play again this season.
Something else that we'll be watching is Brock Bowers' availability. We'll see. I'm going to have a note on the board in a little bit with a little bit of an update for those listening live. But we're kind of getting closer and closer to where it is realistic to maybe see number 19 back. And that will be something we'll be watching closely on Saturday. I want to make sure and plug on Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time, 11 a.m. Central. I will do a podcast with David Johnson from Inside the Rebels. We're going to jump totally into this game between Ole Miss and Georgia, get a better feel for the Rebels, and get a sense of what we're going to see in Sanford Stadium. Before we get out of here, Georgia men's basketball minute. We're going to do this super quick. Georgia lost to Oregon 82-71 in Las Vegas on Monday. Very poor showing from Georgia. Very poor shooting performance. Started super, super cold. Got out rebounded. I believe it was 63-41. I know they allowed 63 rebounds in that loss. The one bright spot I would say for Georgia is that they fought back multiple times. They were down 16 to 17 points a couple different times. First half when they rallied, RJ Melendez was big. Jabri Abdur-Rahim was really big in closing the gap. Second half, Justin Hill really came on. I thought he had his best half of basketball, and RJ Melendez, I believe, chipped in about 9 points. So very disappointing showing against the Ducks, an Oregon team that was pretty banged up going into that game. But Georgia's got to clean up its shooting and do a much better job on the glass. They're going to have to do it quickly because on Friday they are hosting Wake Forest. I think this is going to be a very good Demon Deacons team, and Georgia's definitely going to have to clean some things if they're going to avoid starting the season 0-2. The non-conference schedule is quite tough, and they better show up and have cleaned up some stuff if they're going to win this one.
I knew it probably wasn't a great sign for Georgia when Cario Oquendo was coming off the bench. I think he only caught about 10 minutes. And I was thinking, I know it's a different team. This was a roster overhaul. There are reasons why he's not in Athens right now, but I thought it probably wasn't a great indicator for what the two teams' rosters were going to look like.
When he buried a three.
Yeah, he had the dagger.
Yeah, he buried a 3 on Blue Cane, and I started writing my post-game story.
I would like to shout out. I would like to shout out the freshmen, though. I thought Silas Demery and Blue Cane both did some pretty good things in that one. So, again, if you're looking for silver linings, optimistic future in the Mike White tenure, I would say that looking at those two guys is a place to start.
Absolutely. Well, we are going to wrap up this episode. I appreciate Kipp and Ben for popping on. Thank you to everyone who watched this live, everyone who is listening to this after the fact. If you have not already, go to dogs247.com and subscribe. Got all kinds of good content about the football team, football recruiting, the men's basketball team, men's basketball recruiting as well. Also, go to Dogs247 on YouTube. Subscribe there. You'll get Kirby Smart press conferences, player interviews, Mike White press conferences, and men's basketball player interviews, and these podcasts as well. So, for Kipp Adams and Benjamin Wolk, I am Jordan Hill. Until next time.